Hello, YouTube. I'm an employment attorney. My name is Vince White, and I received a question today, which it's June 15th, nearly summer, and it's getting hot out there in many parts of the country. And somebody wanted to know, hey, do I have a right to AC, air conditioning, in the workplace? And the answer is no, but that's the short answer. The better answer is if you have a medical condition that requires air conditioning, and if your employer is such that it would be reasonable for them to give you that accommodation, because that's what you're doing under the law, right? A reasonable accommodation. If it's reasonable for them to give you that accommodation, and you do need it as a medical requirement of your disability, then yes, at that point I would say you could demand the reasonable accommodation of air conditioning. I think a lot of people are going to say, oh, what if I work in a warehouse and it's not air conditioned, and on and on and on. Well, okay, so that's a reasonability standard. There's a sliding scale of reasonability, right? If you're working in a 10,000 square foot warehouse and it costs oodles upon oodles of money to install and operate air conditioning in that warehouse, then probably the government's going to look at that accommodation and say, yeah, we don't think it's reasonable for us to require this of your employer. Fair enough. If you're working in a 3-room office and there's windows, and your employer could throw in a $400 AC unit into the window of your office because you need it for your medical accommodation, well, I bet you that's reasonable, right? And listen, these are extreme cases, and obviously, different jobs are different, right? If you're a hiking tour guide, can you demand AC from your employer? No, you're outside the whole time. Stop, right? I mean, that's ridiculous. But if you're working in an exercise studio and you're teaching people how to spin, you're running spin classes, and you're a physically fit person, but you got a medical condition and you need the AC. I don't know what the medical condition is. I'm not a doctor, but your doctor says you need AC. Well, you got one studio, and one would think they could give air conditioning to one room, right? Probably at that point reasonable, right? So it is job dependent. It really is a reasonability standard. You have to use your judgment a little bit. Teachers. This is often an issue for teachers, right? Where a teacher will come in and ask for the accommodation, like, I need air conditioning for my medical condition. Okay. So, listen, there's this whole other issue with, like, people arguing kids need AC for the school and all that. Throw all that out. We're not talking about that right now. We're only talking about employee rights. Let's assume this school that we're talking about does not have air conditioning. Many schools in the United States still do not have air conditioning. At least, I went to a Catholic school, and it definitely didn't have air conditioning. Not promoting any faith or anything like that. Just saying I went to a religious school. It's a private school, not a fancy private school, but it didn't have AC. But let's say a teacher walks into that school without AC and says, well, I need AC for my medical condition. Okay. So if putting an AC unit in that teacher's room accommodates that teacher, probably reasonable. If that teacher says, no, it's actually, it's way worse than that, I need central air in the entire building, probably not going to be reasonable, right? At some point they're going to say, well, how do you go outside, right? Like, maybe we need to get you like a special cooling suit or something, if such a thing exists. I don't know, but the point where you're like, oh, I'm going to just spend $100,000 to AC the whole building, probably not going to happen, right? I hope this presents kind of the gray area of AC, because there's going to be areas where, like, in the middle there's a tension. You're like, is that reasonable? Is it not reasonable? Who decides? Well, juries, judges, state and federal agencies, depending on where you are and what venue you file with, right? But also the employer to an extent, right? So you ask, your doctor gives you a letter saying, hey, this is what you need for your reasonable accommodation. You take the letter in, you give it to your employer. they're going to owe you two things. One, a dialogue with you about whether or not your accommodation is something they can reasonably do. And they might say, well, listen, we can't do the whole building. We can do your room, but nothing else. And you might say, well, how about my room and the teacher's lounge? Now we're talking, right? This is a conversation about what you need to be safe, comfortable, and successful in your employment in spite of your medical condition. So that dialogue has to take place, and then the employer needs to make a determination. Can we do it? Can we not do it? Right? If they determine, hey, we don't think that's reasonable, we don't think we can do it, your recourse, if you disagree, probably to file a case. Bring a claim. Talk to an attorney about it, right? You can sue them and say, hey, you failed to grant me a reasonable accommodation. Now, if we're talking about, whether or not it's they refuse to AC the warehouse for you. I mean, I guess maybe an attorney will take that case, but they shouldn't. Doesn't sound like a good case to me. It sounds like they're just robbing you of your money, right? And that's not to say you don't deserve to be safe in the workplace. It's more to say, listen, probably that accommodation is not going to be reasonable under the law, and you may need to look somewhere else. Maybe the better accommodation for the warehouse, that's 10,000 square feet, and I don't even really know how big that is in my mind, but which it would cost some astronomical sum to air condition. Maybe their solution is, well, okay, we can't do that, but we do have a logistical job in the office that we think you'd be great for, and maybe we can transfer you to a position where you can be safe in the AC and everybody's happy, except the employees who didn't have a medical condition who are still working in the very hot warehouse, right? But we can't help them. There's no laws to help them besides OSHA and safety regulations. And OSHA's a little behind. A little bit behind on the site visits these days. Anyways, this video is way too long for this question. It should have been a 3-minute answer. So nobody's going to watch it, except maybe the person who asked the question, I hope. And I wish you all the best. Oh, if this was helpful, consider liking and subscribing. That does help me to help more people just like you.